They thought it was frozen soup. Then one of them took a spoonful and started laughing. It was July 1945, the kind of heat that made the ground shimmer and the air taste of dust and metal. The war was over, or so everyone kept saying. But inside Camp Marston, a prisoner of war camp tucked between the pine fields of southern Georgia, it still felt like something unfinished lingered in the air. The war had ended on paper. It hadn't yet left the bones of the men who had fought it. Beyond the barbed wire, tractors hummed and children chased fireflies in the fields. Inside, 312 German prisoners waited for a future they couldn't picture. The Americans called them the quiet ones. They worked the fields, built fences, mended roofs. They rarely spoke. Every sound seemed measured: shovels and dirt, boots on gravel, the clang of tin plates at mealtime. At noon that day, Sergeant Tom Brown arrived in a jeep coated with red dust. He was 28, broad-shouldered, with sunburned cheeks and a habit of whistling when things got too quiet. The prisoners paused as he climbed down, hauling a dented metal drum from the back of the jeep. Condensation ran down its sides. "Lunch, boys," he said with a grin. "American style." The Germans gathered around, wary. They'd eaten canned beans, boiled corn, cornbread so dry it felt like sandpaper, but never anything served from a steel barrel covered in frost. A thin man with hollow eyes leaned closer and muttered in German, "Es ist Sup, Jeffrin?" Soup, but frozen? Brown pulled off the lid. Inside was a white, half-solid mass, slick and cold, smelling faintly of milk. "You'll like it," he said, handing out spoons. No one moved. The heat pressed against them, heavy and silent. Then one man stepped forward. His name was Franz, 26, former mechanic from Bremen. He'd been captured in Tunisia 2 years earlier, and his voice still carried the accent of the North Sea. He dipped his spoon in, hesitated, then brought it to his lips. The others watched. His face froze for a second, unreadable. Then his eyes widened, and, unexpectedly, he laughed. A full, chest-deep laugh that startled even him. "Mein Gott, it's sweet." The other prisoners blinked. Franz scooped another spoonful, then passed it to the man beside him, who tasted it, frowned, and then laughed too. Soon spoons clattered against the sides of the drum, the men's laughter rippling through the air like something remembered. One of them asked in broken English, "What is this?" Brown smirked. "Ice cream." They repeated it clumsily, "ice cream," as if testing the shape of the word in their mouths. A strange word, light and harmless. In minutes, the noise spread through the yard. Men who hadn't smiled in months were laughing like schoolboys, pointing their spoons at each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Someone started humming a tune, something from home, though no one could place it anymore. Across the fence, a few American guards watched, puzzled. "What the hell are they doing?" one asked. Brown shrugged. "Eating peace, I guess." A small group of local workers passed on the road outside. They slowed to look. Germans, their supposed enemies, laughing under the American flag, spoons shining in the sun. The absurdity of it struck everyone. For the first time since the surrender, the camp didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like something human trying to remember itself. Later that afternoon, the camp chaplain wrote in his notebook, "July 17th, 1945. The heat unbearable. At noon, the men tasted something cold. Laughter followed. No fights, no shouts, no orders needed. For the first time since the armistice, silence was not fear, it was peace." By evening, the white drum was empty, scraped clean to metal. The prisoners sat under the shade of the barracks, their stomachs full, their eyes distant but softer. Brown leaned against the fence, lighting a cigarette. One of the older Germans, a former teacher, looked up at him through the wire. "Freedom," he said, searching for the right word. "Freedom tastes strange." Brown exhaled smoke, looked at the orange sky, and answered, "Yeah, sometimes it does." When night fell, the guards found a few of the prisoners still sitting outside, humming quietly to themselves. The camp seemed smaller, the air lighter. Someone left a note on Brown's desk the next morning. They laughed, just like us. No one could explain why that simple act, sharing something cold on a hot day, felt like a turning point. But in the following weeks, the report would travel up the chain of command, passed from officer to officer, until it reached Washington. And in the records of Camp Marston, Georgia, one entry would stand out among the lists of rations, escapes, and weather notes. It read, July 17th, 1945, first recorded instance of reconciliation. German POWs served ice cream. Hostility dissolved. What none of them knew was that this small, forgotten event, this laughter over a frozen spoonful of sugar, would mark the first time anyone wrote that a war ended, not with words or treaties, but with dessert. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. One guard said later, they looked like kids who just saw snow for the first time. That evening, Camp Marston glowed under the kind of southern sunset that painted everything in copper. The air smelled of earth and diesel, the day's heat finally loosening its grip. The prisoners sat in small clusters outside their barracks, wooden benches creaking under their weight. Someone had found a harmonica, and the notes rose slow and unsure, drifting over the wire fence and into the American side. For once, no one shouted orders. No boots stamped. No barked schnell. Or move along. Just men sitting, listening to a sound that wasn't war. Sergeant Tom Brown leaned against the hood of his Jeep, cigarette tucked behind his ear, watching them. He wasn't used to seeing Germans laugh. In Tunisia, they'd been fierce, hollow-eyed men who fought until their guns melted. Now they looked ordinary. One of them, the one who had laughed first, Franz, was telling a story in German, pantomiming with his hands while the others chuckled around him. Even the guards on duty forgot to look stern. The camp's chaplain, Father Samuel Hayes, walked over and stood beside Brown. Never seen anything like it, he murmured. Brown nodded. Guess ice cream can do what bullets can't. Hayes smiled faintly. Funny thing, Grace. Then he pulled a small notebook from his pocket and began to write. Later, those notes would end up in a file labeled Chaplain's Journal, Camp Marston, July 18, 1945. He wrote, Remarkable event today. German prisoners laughing. Guards watching without suspicion. For a brief hour, the war seemed like a story someone told us a long time ago. As dusk thickened, the harmonica switched to a tune Brown half recognized, an old German lullaby. Soft, almost mournful. The prisoners sang it low, their voices blending into something fragile and beautiful. Across the fence, a few American soldiers listened in silence, heads lowered, hands tucked in their pockets. Private Lewis, the youngest guard, whispered, You'd never think they were the same men who shot at us. Brown didn't answer right away. They're not, he finally said. Not tonight. Later, in his letter to his wife, he wrote, They're just men, honey. Not monsters. Just tired boys with hollow eyes. Some look younger than my kid brother. When they laughed today, I swear, it sounded like the war forgot them for a minute. Inside the wire, the Germans spoke in quiet tones. Franz sat beside another prisoner named Becker, a former violinist from Leipzig. Becker said, Do you think they'll let us go home soon? Franz shrugged. Maybe, but I don't know what home looks like anymore. Becker smiled sadly. Then maybe we build a new one. Even if it's just here, for now. At that moment, Brown walked past and tossed something through the fence, a small tin cup and a packet of cocoa powder. For tomorrow, he said, make yourselves something sweet. The men looked at the packet as if it were treasure. Franz lifted it to his nose, inhaling deeply. Chocolate, he whispered. The others nodded, reverent. The next day, a new routine appeared in the camp. During breaks from work, small groups gathered near the kitchen shed, trying to replicate the strange frozen treat they'd tasted. They had no ice, no cream, no sugar. But they had milk from the farm down the road and a stubborn curiosity. They mixed what they could find, stirring in old coffee cans, guessing ratios. It melted before it froze, turned gritty and gray, but the laughter that followed was the same as before. Soon the Americans started calling them the ice cream unit. It began as a joke, but the name stuck. When the kitchen staff came around, they'd wave and ask, How's the research going, boys? And the prisoners would raise their spoons and salute. That evening, a small crowd gathered by the fence. One of the Germans gestured toward the Americans and asked, This ice cream, it's an American invention? Brown chuckled. Sort of, but everyone smiles the same way when they eat it. Franz translated, and the men laughed. Someone clapped Brown on the shoulder through the wire. The guards didn't stop it. Nobody wanted to break the spell. That night, lightning bugs floated over the camp like tiny lanterns. The harmonica played again, this time joined by soft humming. Hayes wrote one last line in his notebook before turning in. Peace doesn't always march in uniform. Sometimes it comes with a spoon. But in the stillness that followed, something lingered, an unspoken question. How long could this fragile truce last? The next morning, a rumor spread through the camp that made the guards exchange puzzled looks. A group of prisoners, led by Franz, had gone to the American cook with a strange request, permission to make ice cream themselves. Why? The cook asked. Franz smiled. Because we want to remember what happiness tastes like. By noon, they were given a corner of the kitchen yard, a few empty barrels, and a block of ice meant for cooling milk. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. And that was the day when the story stopped being about dessert and became something else entirely. They had no machines, no sugar, and August pressed down like a wet blanket. Still, by mid-morning the prisoners had cleared a corner of the kitchen yard, turning junk into tools. 2 coffee cans, a lard bucket, a chipped spoon, a block of ice sweating under burlap. Milk from a nearby farm, a pinch of salt, a whisper of vanilla, the ingredients of something they barely remembered. They worked in silence. Becker, the violinist, touched the can as if tuning an instrument. Franz grinned. We used to build weapons, he said softly. Now we build smiles. Sergeant Tom Brown showed up carrying a sack of rock salt. You'll need this. Salt eats the heat, he said, dropping it beside them. Guess peace tastes like vanilla. The men nodded, not sure if it was a joke. The first attempt failed. The milk curdled, the ice melted too fast, and the result looked like gray soup. Franz tasted it anyway, made a face, then laughed. Noch einmal, he said. Again. They cleaned the cans and started over. By noon they found rhythm. 2 men packed ice and salt. 2 cranked the can by hand. 1 scraped the sides where frost began to form. The air filled with the metallic rhythm of work and the faint sound of Becker humming a lullaby from home. Sweat ran down their faces. They didn't notice. After half an hour the crank stiffened. Becker pried the lid open. A puff of cold air rose like a ghost, and inside, soft, white, glistening, was something close to ice cream. The men stared. Then Franz dipped a spoon, tasted, and smiled. Ja, he whispered. They passed the spoon around, slow at first, then faster. The laughter that followed was different this time. Calmer, freer. Brown tasted it too, shaking his head. You did it, he said. I'll be damned. In the shade, the cook leaned against the doorframe, pretending not to watch. He quietly placed a can of condensed milk beside them before walking away. The prisoners took it like a gift from heaven. By afternoon, the yard smelled faintly of vanilla and wet wood. Becker sketched rough measurements on a scrap of paper, marking what worked, what didn't. Vogel, the one-armed machinist, tapped the drawing. Doctrine, he said, dead serious. The others laughed until they coughed. A few townspeople delivering feed stopped at the fence. They frowned at the sight of Germans laughing over a barrel of ice. One muttered something about the world turning upside down. Another just stared, then walked off without a word. When the second batch finished, it was smoother. They scraped it into tin cups and passed it along, sharing evenly until the bucket was empty. A guard on the tower removed his cap without realizing it. Somewhere, a harmonica began to play, a lullaby carried on the thick air. That evening, the camp chaplain wrote in his log, POWs organized ice cream day. Morale highest since capture. They have built something human. He underlined the last word twice. Before the men returned to the barracks, Becker tore a strip from a feed sack and wrote, A.S. Recept, pinning it to the shed wall. Franz touched the paper. So we don't forget, he said. The barracks buzzed quietly that night. No shouts, no orders, just low murmurs, soft laughter, the rustle of men remembering what peace sounded like. But dawn came with an unexpected sight. Franz and Becker stood outside the kitchen door, caps in hand, faces serious. The cook looked up from his ledger. Sergeant, Franz said carefully, his English halting but clear. Permission to make again. Today. Brown frowned. For who? Franz turned toward the fence. Beyond it, down the dirt road, children's voices floated from the nearby town. For them, he said simply. For the children. The camp went still. Even the flies seemed to pause. A guard coughed. Brown exchanged a glance with the cook, who set down his pen. The request was written that morning in uneven handwriting and placed on the captain's desk. It asked just one question. May German prisoners prepare ice cream for the local town's children? No one knew yet how the answer would read, but everyone felt the air shift, as if the war itself were holding its breath. They came with wide eyes and empty hands, and the prisoners offered them the coldest, sweetest peace. It was Sunday morning, August 1945. Heat shimmered off the wire fence, and the pine trees beyond the camp stood motionless in the still air. From the town of Aliceville, a handful of farm families had walked the dirt road to see what the commotion was about. Word had spread fast. The Germans are making ice cream. No one quite believed it. But curiosity, like heat, has a way of breaking through fences. On the American side, children in overalls and faded dresses gathered near the gate, their parents hovering behind them. Inside, the prisoners stood in a neat line, each holding a tin bowl. They looked awkward, unsure how to begin. Between them, a barrel of fresh ice cream sat half-buried in melting ice, steam rising as the sun hit it. Sergeant Tom Brown adjusted his cap, glanced at the camp captain, who wasn't there, and gave a tiny nod. "All right," he muttered. "Let's do it quick." The gate opened halfway, just enough for a wooden table to be dragged through, legs scraping the dirt. The prisoners placed their bowls in a row. A few guards watched, rifles slung loosely at their sides. No one quite knew whether this was allowed. The first child to step forward was a girl of maybe 7, barefoot, her hair tied with a red ribbon. She stopped short when she saw the men behind the table, tall, tanned, wearing khaki overalls with POWs stenciled across the chest. She looked back at her mother. "Annie, no," the woman called sharply. But the girl was already moving. A prisoner, Walter, the oldest of the group, with kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses, crouched and offered her a small spoonful. His hand trembled just slightly. Annie took it, hesitated, then tasted. Her face lit up, ice cream streaking her chin. She laughed, a clear, unguarded sound that carried across the fence. Something in the crowd shifted. Another child stepped forward, then another. Soon the table was surrounded. Tin cups clattered. The Germans smiled, shy at first, then openly. Becker played a tune on his harmonica, the melody thin but cheerful. Walter watched Annie run back to her mother, waving the empty spoon like a prize. He said quietly, almost to himself, "My daughter is your age." Then he turned away, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Brown noticed and pretended not to. He lit a cigarette, his hand shaking just a little. For half an hour, the fence stopped meaning anything. Farmers chatted with guards. Women laughed at the clumsy English of the prisoners, and the children kept coming back for seconds. Someone brought out a bucket of peaches. The Germans chopped them in, turning the mixture a pale golden color. When the barrel was finally empty, the laughter didn't stop. It softened, drifting into something like gratitude. Later that day, the Aliceville Times printed a short piece on page 4. Yesterday, German prisoners shared ice cream with local children. For a brief moment, there were no sides, no fences, only laughter. It was a small story, easy to miss between reports of ration cuts and returning soldiers. But everyone in town read it. Some smiled, others frowned. That evening, when the sun slid low behind the pines, Brown sat outside the barracks with Father Hayes. The chaplain tapped his notebook with a pencil. "You realize you'll catch hell for this," he said. Brown exhaled smoke. "Maybe, but tell me that didn't look like peace." Hayes smiled. "If it wasn't, I don't know what is." The camp quieted as the stars came out. The last echoes of laughter faded, replaced by crickets and the hum of the generator. In one of the barracks, Franz was sketching on a scrap of paper, a little girl holding a spoon, smiling. He pinned it to the wall beside the recipe for ice cream. It might have ended there, just another small kindness forgotten by morning. But when the headlights appeared that night, sweeping across the camp yard, the mood shifted. A jeep rolled to a stop in front of the gate. The driver cut the engine. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, hat gleaming even in the half-light. He carried a folder under his arm, official, heavy. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the command office. The guard straightened. Brown's cigarette burned low between his fingers. The officer didn't look at anyone as he passed. He opened the door, disappeared inside, and the murmur of voices began, low, clipped, serious. Paper rustled. 15 minutes later, he emerged. "Sergeant Brown," he said without emotion. "Orders from headquarters. You'll brief your men at dawn." "Yes, sir." "About what?" The officer's eyes flicked toward the darkened yard. where the empty ice cream barrel still sat glistening with meltwater. About boundaries, he said. And what happens when they're forgotten? He turned, got back into the Jeep, and drove away, leaving tire tracks that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Inside the barracks, the men lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the night air thickened, heavy with the taste of salt and something else, the feeling that, for all the sweetness of the day, the world had just remembered its fences again. Kindness, it turned out, was more dangerous than escape. Morning came heavy with silence. The wind had shifted, cooler, sharper, and the laughter that once filled the camp seemed like something remembered from a dream. The empty ice cream barrel sat by the kitchen wall, still crusted with frost around the rim. Beside it, a new notice had been pinned up overnight. Order 12B, effective immediately. No contact with civilians. No food, letters, or gifts exchanged across the perimeter. Someone had added, in pencil, no smiles either, but nobody laughed. The Germans lined up for roll call. Franz kept his gaze fixed on the dirt. Becker fiddled with the hem of his sleeve. Walter polished his glasses until they squeaked, pretending not to see the fence. It was as if every man had folded himself back into obedience overnight. The sun climbed higher, burning away the dew, but not the weight. In the command office, Sergeant Tom Brown stood across from Captain Adkins, who was reading a telegram for the third time. The desk between them looked like a border. "Sir," Brown began carefully, "about yesterday." Atkins didn't look up. "Yesterday was a mistake." "They weren't plotting anything," Brown said. "They were making ice cream." Atkins finally raised his eyes. "They're still the enemy, Sergeant. Some people out there have husbands who never came home. They don't want their children sharing spoons with men who wore the wrong uniform." Brown's jaw clenched. "Sir, maybe it's time the war ended for real." The captain's expression hardened. "That's above our pay grade." He handed Brown a stack of forms. "You'll brief your guards. No exceptions." The conversation was over. By afternoon, the camp had gone quiet again. Work crews moved like clockwork. No humming, no talking. The air smelled of dust and distant rain. When the truck from town dropped off supplies, the driver avoided eye contact. He spat once, muttered something about spoiling prisoners, and drove off. After supper, the prisoners gathered by the barracks, the sky bruised with sunset. Becker sat on an overturned crate, tracing a tune on his harmonica without blowing a note. Franz stared at the road beyond the fence, where he'd seen children playing the day before. Walter turned a spoon in his hands as if weighing its purpose. Then Becker stood, went to the kitchen shed, and returned with a tin bowl, a small batch of what ice they had managed to make. He carried it to the fence, placed it on the ground, and stepped back. The others watched, but said nothing. The minutes stretched. Then a rustle. A child's shape appeared at the edge of the trees, paused, looked back once, and came closer. The girl, Annie, knelt by the fence. Brown, standing near the gate, froze but didn't move. Her small hand slipped through the wire, reaching for the bowl. The spoon clinked against the side, once, twice. Then laughter. Quiet, quick, impossible to stop. The men didn't dare smile, but their eyes gave them away. Becker looked at Brown across the yard. Brown said nothing, only tipped his cap. When the bowl was empty, the girl pushed it back through the fence and ran. The sound of her footsteps faded into the pines. Becker picked it up gently, wiped the rim clean with his sleeve, and set it back down by his feet. "For tomorrow," he whispered, though everyone knew there might not be one. That night, Father Hayes wrote in his journal, "Orders against contact posted today. Yet kindness continues, quietly, through fences. At several camps, including Aliceville, bread, fruit, and even letters have passed hand to hand despite prohibition. It seems easier to regulate war than mercy." The next morning, a jeep arrived from headquarters. The courier delivered a sealed envelope marked confidential redeployment. Captain Adkins read it twice, lips moving without sound, then sent for Brown. "They're sending them home," he said finally. "Repatriation. Within the week." Brown stared. "All of them. Most. Staggered transports. We start preparations immediately." Brown nodded slowly. A weight lifted, and another settled in its place. He thought of the recipe Becker had pinned to the shed wall, the faded words, "EIS, Recept," a souvenir of a truce no one had authorized. As word spread, the camp changed again. Not louder, but alive. Men polished their boots, folded their blankets with care. Some whispered plans for when they'd see their families again. Others just stared at the horizon, afraid to hope too hard. That evening, when the sun turned red behind the trees, the Germans gathered near the same fence. No guard stopped them. Becker turned the crank of the ice cream can, slow and steady. The sound of metal scraping ice rose and fell with the rhythm of breathing. Walter poured the last of the milk in. Franz hummed a tune without words. Brown watched from the tower stairs, arms crossed. He should have ordered them back to barracks. He didn't. The air smelled faintly of vanilla again. When the batch was done, they left the can by the gate. Not for the children this time, but for whoever came next. A quiet offering to the idea that sweetness could exist inside a fence. As darkness settled, Brown reread the repatriation order under the lamplight. Departure within 5 days. His fingers brushed the edge of the paper, smudging the ink. He looked out across the camp, at men who no longer seemed like enemies, and thought, maybe mercy isn't meant to follow orders. The night wind carried the faint ring of metal on metal, the sound of a spoon tapping against the side of the can. Somewhere beyond the wire, a child laughed again, too far to see, close enough to hear. And though no one said it aloud, they all knew it. This would be the last time. The last batch, the last kindness, the last moment before the trucks came to take them home. When the trucks came to take them home, the ice cream machine was still running. September 1945. Morning fog hung low over Camp Marston, softening the edges of the barracks and barbed wire. The war felt like a memory no one fully trusted. The air smelled of diesel, wet grass, and something faintly sweet. The last batch freezing in the dented can behind the kitchen shed. The men stood in formation, each with a canvas bag slung over a shoulder, names checked against neat columns on a clipboard. Becker carried his harmonica in his pocket. Franz held a folded scrap of paper, the recipe still smudged with salt and milk. Walter, older now in ways that had nothing to do with age, adjusted his cap and looked toward the horizon. Sergeant Tom Brown walked the line slowly. "You boys ready to go home?" he asked. Franz smiled. "Home," he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time in years. The trucks rumbled at the gate, engines coughing to life. The guards helped the men climb aboard. No chains, no shouts, just the heavy sound of boots on metal and quiet goodbyes. Brown stopped beside Walter and held out his hand. Walter hesitated, then took it, his grip strong, almost trembling. "Thank you," he said, "for the taste of peace." Brown nodded, eyes low. "Next time," he said softly, "come without the uniform." Walter smiled, thin but real. "Next time, maybe you will visit us." Behind them, the kitchen door banged open. Becker had stayed behind for one last task. He knelt beside the can, turning the crank by hand. The mixture inside was nearly done, thick and smooth. He lifted the lid and looked at it a long time, steam rising in the cool air. Then he took a small spoon, scooped a bit, and set it on the fence post for the wind to take. When he finally climbed into the truck, Brown shouted, "Forget the recipe?" Becker grinned. "No, Sergeant. I left it here. For whoever's next." As the trucks pulled away, the sound of their engines blended with the hum of insects, the low sigh of trees. The guards raised their hands, some in salute, some in quiet farewell. Brown watched until the last canvas-covered truck disappeared down the dirt road, leaving only tire tracks and a few drifting papers in its wake. Father Hayes walked up beside him, notebook in hand. "You'll miss them," he said. Brown didn't answer right away. He looked at the empty yard, at the can still turning slowly in the wind. "Yeah," he said finally. "Didn't think I would, but yeah." The chaplain opened his notebook and wrote something down. Later, his report would read, September 2nd, 1945. Camp closure. POWs repatriated. No incidents. Farewell conducted with respect. Final act. German prisoners prepared and shared ice cream with guards before departure. Symbolic closure. Mercy understood without translation. By noon, the camp was half dismantled. Barracks stripped bare, fences loosened from their posts. A radio on the porch played crackling music from Atlanta, jazz, bright and careless. Brown sat on a crate, rolling a cigarette he never lit. He thought of Walter's daughter, of Annie's laughter through the fence, of the strange alchemy that turned milk and ice into something strong enough to soften men who'd once pointed rifles at each other. A week later, a letter arrived from Hamburg. The return address was written in neat, unfamiliar English. Walter Newman. Inside was a single page. Sergeant Brown. Every summer, when I give my son ice cream, I tell him once an American soldier taught me how peace tastes. My boy thinks I'm joking, but one day he'll understand. Brown folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his field journal. The same journal that still held the first note from March, the day Franz had laughed over a frozen spoonful of sugar. Autumn came early that year. The camp grass turned yellow, then brown. The wind carried the scent of pine and something faintly metallic, like old memories. On his last day before transfer, Brown walked the perimeter one final time. The wire was down, coiled in piles. The guard towers were empty. Only the posts remained, casting long shadows across the dirt. He stopped at the kitchen yard. The ice cream can sat on its side, rust beginning to bloom along the rim. He lifted it, turned it once in his hands, and set it upright again. In the dirt nearby, half buried under leaves, he found Becker's recipe sheet. Edges stiff, letters fading. EIS, Recept. He brushed it clean, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. The sound of a truck horn called from the gate. Brown looked up, squinting against the glare. He gave the yard one last glance. For a moment, he imagined the fence still standing, the children laughing, Walter waving from the other side. Then the image faded, leaving only sunlight and silence. He climbed into the Jeep, started the engine, and drove away, the wind tugging at his sleeve. Behind him, in the empty camp, the last spoon still rested on the fence post. A gust caught it, knocking it gently against the metal rim of the can. Ding! A small, clean sound that echoed once and was gone. War has 1,000 ways to strip a man of his humanity, but sometimes a single taste can give it back.